My name is Pellegrino Riccardi, and I am today going to talk to you about this. We are humans, not Zoomans. Some tips on emerging from the pandemic, ready for better and braver collaborations. Since I only have 15 minutes with you, I'll jump straight into it with this. Perception is only half the truth. Perception is only half the truth. What do I mean by that? Your vision of the world, what you see on an everyday basis, is only half the truth. Sometimes it's even less. And one thing I've learned over the last year has forced me to relook at things in a new way, look at them again. And I want to talk a little bit about perception, because my field of expertise is intercultural communication. But what I'm really interested in is the interaction of people. You see, when you have a name like this with an Italian background, my family is from Italy, they're from the Napoli area. They moved to the UK in 1960, where I was born and raised, and I've lived in Norway for 25 years now. Now I can be all three of these identities. I can pretend to be Italian, British, or Norwegian, and I do all of them really well. And whichever one I adopt, I'm always the same person. It's always me. It's always Pellegrino Riccardi, right? But I am fascinated by the different ways in which people see me, their perception of me. And I've had a lot of fun with this over the years. I've had lots of fun with this phrase here, putting this phrase into normal situations, because when I say it with a British accent, it works quite well. You can trust me. If I say it with a Norwegian accent, that works quite well too. You can trust me, I'm from Norway. And people around the world believe that in Norway, there's a high level of trust. That's their perception. But it doesn't matter which situation I use this in. Whenever I do it with an Italian accent, people just laugh at me. You can trust me. Don't worry, I'm from Italy. You can trust me, right? And I'm sure some of you smiled, even though I'm playing with stereotypes. So it's this whole idea of perceptions, what we see. And I want to give you some tips on collaborations and the perceptions we see when we work with other nations. Because you see, last year in March, my world came to a sudden, dark stop. And my perception of the world changed dramatically. I lost all my work in the space of a week. I was suddenly unemployed. And I recalled the famous words of Sir Winston Churchill, who once said, never waste a good crisis. Never waste a good crisis. Now, what did he mean by this? Well, what he didn't mean, he wasn't saying ignore the problems, ignore the obstacles. Of course, he wasn't saying this. But what he was saying was, even though there seem to be great obstacles, there are also opportunities. But what stops us from seeing the opportunities? What stops us from challenging our own perceptions of future collaborations? Well, let's start with the brain. The brain is your best friend, but also your worst enemy. What do I mean by your worst enemy? Well, the brain is a bit lazy. Psychologists don't use the term lazy. They use a term called the path of least resistance. What does that mean? It simply means that your brain has learned over centuries that the easiest way to survive is often the best. It's always looking to get from A to B in the shortest possible way. How does this work in everyday life? Well, imagine you're lying on the sofa watching Netflix during your COVID lockdown, and I'm sure you've done that. I've done lots of it. And you think to yourself, I should really go for a run. Your brain will then say to you, are you sure about that? Do you really need to do that to stay alive? No, you don't. You don't need to if you don't want to. And so you don't. The path of least resistance. And then you'll feel guilty about it, but then your brain does an amazing thing. Your brain will start telling you a story which helps you make you feel better, which allows you to continue the laziness. Make sense? That's why COVID has been so bad for us, because it's forced us into a place which we don't like, working from home, but at the same time is comfortable and easy for the brain to cope with in many levels, not all levels. Why am I telling you this? Because collaboration requires you to challenge the laziness of the brain. Now, I'm a linguist by trade, so when I see a word, I need to know where it comes from. And if you look at the word collaboration, you'll see it comes from Latin and it means with labor. In other words, collaboration is hard work. Collaboration is never easy. It's always hard work, and you need to challenge your brain. That's why, by the way, a woman giving birth is in labor, because it's hard, really hard, all right? The other thing about the brain is that it's a bit of a party pooper. If you're going to a party, don't take your brain. Why? Well, because the brain is programmed to look for the negatives before the positives. There's a very simple explanation for this. If we go back to the days of cavemen and cave women, right? In order to leave that cave, we left this safe cave and we entered a world that was truly dangerous. So the brain was sharpened to see all the dangers. Psychologists tell us that we're 5 times more likely to see problems before benefits. And when you're working with cross-cultural collaborations, you will find problems and reasons not to do it much easier than reasons to do it. That's normal. That's how the brain works. But there are always benefits in everything, even snoring. Yes, I'm going to talk about snoring. Do you think the woman there thinks that snoring is a problem or a benefit? Right, it's a problem. But there's a benefit with snoring. If you look hard enough, I'm being completely serious here. I spoke to an evolutionary psychologist who explained why we snore. You see, way back in time when we slept in our caves, we were vulnerable. We could be attacked by dangerous animals. So to scare the animals away while we slept, we developed snoring. And the louder you snored, the safer you slept. Isn't that amazing? The last time my wife complained about my snoring, I looked at her and I said, can't you be a little bit grateful? I'm trying to keep you alive. Yes, all right? So my point is this, that seeing negatives is the brain's default. Seeing positives is a choice. Once again, I'm not saying we ignore the problems. The problems are there and you will see them easily. But can you see the opportunities and the benefits? That's an active choice, and the brain is a muscle and it needs to be exercised. This is so important when we talk about change. Now, they say that people don't like change. Partly true. They say that the only person that does like change is a wet baby. I quite like that quote there, right? But there's certain types of change that really humans find difficult. And perhaps the most difficult one is anything that involves the unknown. And if anything, the last year has shown us what the unknown does to us as a species. It's very difficult to deal with the unknown. So what is it that people have? What qualities that people have? The ones who deal with change and the ones who make collaborations work. What kind of qualities do they have? Well, I've worked in this field for many, many years, and I've come to the conclusion that they tend to have 3 things. It's not rocket science, right? They tend to be open, curious, and brave. That's it. Why are they brave? Brave because they jump into the unknown without having the answers beforehand. Now, the simplest example I can give you was when I suddenly became unemployed. After the initial 2-3 months of shock, I decided that I had to do something about it. I love standing on a stage and looking at people in the eyes, but I can't do that anymore. So I learned to do this. And there was only one way to do it. Be open, be curious, and jump into the unknown. And you know this word brave, it's a beautiful word. Courage, which in Italian is coraggio. Coraggio, what a beautiful word. Coraggio. Oh, che bello. Coraggio is a beautiful word. The most important part of that word are the first 3 letters, because that is an old Italian spelling of a modern Italian word, cuore, and cuore means heart. In other words, jumping into something, into the unknown, needs to be done with the whole heart. You cannot do it halfway. You've got to go the whole way. And this is what people who deal with change and challenges do. They're open, curious, and brave, especially curious. Let me talk to you a little bit about being curious, because it's okay for me to say, be curious. But why? I'll tell you why. Because every time we engage our curiosity, every time we approach a problem with genuine curiosity, we produce something in our brains called dopamine. Dopamine is a fantastic neurotransmitter that we have been in short supply over the past year, because it's been very difficult to be curious in the past year when you're locked down and forced to work from home. It's really difficult. Now, there are some shortcuts to creating dopamine in the brain. Gambling will create dopamine. Jumping from a plane will give you lots of dopamine, and so will sex and drugs and rock and roll. But none of those will work right now, and none of them are legal either. But there's another way as well. Curiosity and the sense of anticipation. Just the fact that you enter into the unknown looking forward to something, even though you're afraid, engages and produces dopamine. Now, in your neighbor country, in Estonia, the famous psychologist, Jaak Panksepp, worked a lot with this. He worked a lot with rats and rewarding rats in his laboratory experiments. And what he found was that the rats weren't actually, they didn't produce the most dopamine when they reached the goal, the cheese. They produced most dopamine when they were looking forward to and actually being curious about finding things. He called it the seeking system. And the seeking system is what makes us feel more human than Zooman. And when we're locked down, we are unable to engage our seeking system. That's why we watch so much news, because what you're really doing is you're seeking, you're looking. This is why it's irresistible. You can't stop it. Online shopping too. Online shopping is all about the seeking system, the looking for the item you want to buy. When you actually buy it and order it, you get this, oh, it's the seeking. And that's why I encourage people to be curious, because you're producing dopamine. And here comes the main point. Dopamine is our main motivation hormone. It's the hormone that drives you to seek goals and rewards and enables you to make the effort it requires to be successful. In other words, that man and that woman cannot leave the cave unless they produce dopamine first. That's why I tell people to be open, curious, and brave, and force yourself to do it, because you're producing the neurotransmitter in your brain that allows you to reach rewards and success. Because after all, that's what we are. We're humans, not Zoomans. Now, I've had lots of Zoom meetings this past year. I'm sure you have, and Teams and all the other platforms we use. And I must admit, I've had some of them in shorts too. I won't tell you what I'm wearing today. It's not shorts though, okay? But with Zoom comes certain price that we pay, okay? Now, I talk to my father every day, pretty much on Zoom, okay? And here we are talking to each other, and he's happy to talk to us. The last time I saw my father physically, he looked like this at Oslo Airport, and he was coming over to a big celebration in the family. We'd hired an Italian chef to cook for us. It was all great. It was fantastic. It was a confirmation of my son. It was a huge event in Norway. And we took the family picture. Here we are. And just looking at this picture now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, shouldn't they be at least 1 meter apart or 2, right? When you look at that image. And I remember my father standing there. And if you want to talk about cross-cultural differences, you see, when we take family pictures in Italy, it's chaos. It's noisy. You can't get people to stand still. It takes ages to take a photograph. This was orderly, quiet, and Nordic. It was fantastic, but it was very quiet. And I remember my father turning to me and saying, is this a confirmation or a funeral? And it was a great example, right, of the perceptions, the way we look at other cultures, often focusing on the negative. Okay, it was a joke, but it was a negative. Of course, I turned to my father. I said, Norwegians have feelings too, Papa. Don't worry, you'll see them soon. Norwegians have feelings too. Okay, there we go. Sorry, Norwegians, I couldn't resist it. We're humans, not Zoomans. And Zoom has given us something called Zoom fatigue. And what's missing in this picture here? You see, it's great to have technology. It helps us to communicate and to connect. But there's something missing, and it's this. This here is missing. Oxytocin. Another hormone, neurotransmitter, often referred to as the love hormone or the hug hormone, something we produce every time we hug a person or have any form of near contact, whether it's with family, friends, or business associate. Even shaking someone's hand in business, something we used to take for granted before, helps us produce oxytocin. Football fans produce lots of it, standing very close together, right? Oxytocin. Of course, what's happened to the oxytocin now? There are no supporters anymore. And that's what's missing from the game. They try to put a false or a sound of fans on the back of the TV if you watch football on TV now, but it doesn't work. Why? Because there's no oxytocin. Oxytocin is so important that a mother who is going to breastfeed needs to produce oxytocin, otherwise no milk comes out. Why? And here is the point. Oxytocin is what I call human glue. It's what literally glues us together. It's literally what creates connection. And this is what we've been missing the past year. Connection. We're all programmed for connection. Look at this. Our brains are wired for connection. Our brains are wired for connection. Look at this image here of these two medics looking for connection during a time of extreme stress. These two guys have been doing it for millennia. Social grooming. But the most important part is not the finding the animals, it's the touching. We humans have been doing it for 200,000 years. And suddenly, one day in March last year, we're told to stop. No touching. You can use your elbow if you absolutely have to. As if the elbow is the most sensitive part of the body. It's not Zoom fatigue we have, everybody. It's Zoom sickness. And we're sick because we are humans, not Zoomans. So although I've only had 15 minutes with you to talk about this, my advice to you, if you're looking to the future, is you need to force yourselves to be open, curious, and brave. It's what I had to do to transform the work I do. And I didn't have much time to do it, being the main provider of my family in one of the most expensive countries in the world. And it was tough. It was tough. I've had dark days in the past year when I just thought this will never work. But I kept telling myself that when I'm open, curious, and brave, especially curious, I'm producing the all-important dopamine, which allows me to be creative and solution-oriented. At the same time, there will be obstacles. Collaboration is all about labor. It's a difficult task to do. But unless you engage your full humanness, then you will never get it. But I hope that you take my advice. I hope this inspires you and engages you to go out there and jump into the unknown in these cross-cultural collaborations. I wish you all the best of luck. Thank you so much for listening to me.